Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our very first webinar in our new series, An Audience with Our Alumni. My name is Fraser Morrison, and I'm the Company Programmes and Digital Delivery Manager here at Young Enterprise Scotland. And I'm delighted to be joined for the very first time for our first session with our alumni, Matt Davies. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
Good to see you.
And you, lovely to see you.
And thanks so much for joining us today. I wonder, just before we get started, you want to give a short wee intro to let our guest here today know a little bit more about you?
Yeah, of course. So I am 38 years old. I live just on the outskirts of Edinburgh, and I have recently left 15 years in financial services. I left to set up my own leadership consultancy and exec coaching and speaking business. And but prior to that, I went to the University of Glasgow, and prior to that, I grew up in a little village in the northeast of Scotland called Lawrencekirk, where I went to Mearns Academy, and that was where, back in 1999, 2000 time, I took part in Young Enterprise.
Fantastic, and you're still contacting us today, so 21 years later, so we must have done something right.
Absolutely. I think it's such a valuable thing. As you know, we're just discussing the other day. I think a lot of the value doesn't necessarily become clear until later on, but it really does. It does an awful lot for you.
And I think that's hopefully what we'll discover. So the whole point of today is just to find out a little bit more about your young enterprise experience, what you got up to 21 years ago when you're back at school, and the business that you ran, and really how that's impacted your life journey to get to where you are today, and some of the lessons you've learned along the way. The whole purpose of these sessions is to be able to share that experience with some of our students who are taking part in the company programme all across Scotland right now. It's about 4 or 5 weeks into the programme at the moment. And for all of our alumni out there as well, who are maybe just starting their career journey, to hear from somebody else who's gone through that same programme. Because I think, and hopefully you would agree, the programme in many respects can be, I know it's a cliche, but life-changing in terms of the experience that it gives you.
Absolutely, no doubt at all.
So let's take it right back to the start then. So 21 years ago, when you were taking part in the company programme at Mearns Academy, what was the business that you ran?
So our business was called Paragon. And one of the things that was kind of challenging in the early days was exactly what was our business going to be, what were we going to do, what were we going to make, what were we going to sell, what were we going to organise, etc. But in the end, we settled on, there was an industrial estate across the road from our school that had a place called the Body and Face Place that did, soaps and kind of hand lotions and, shower gels, shampoos, all these kind of things. And one of the people in the program knew somebody that worked there. And so we managed to kind of get a deal where we could effectively brand their products as ours and sell those. And that was ultimately what we ended up doing.
And did you fall in love with the product? Was it something like that you were keen on, or was it just something you were selling just because it was something?
It was probably more the latter, to be honest. It was probably more the latter. We had some initial ideas that were a bit more up my street, but ultimately they proved to be non-viable, or in some cases, in one case in particular, the school said, "No, you're absolutely not making T-shirts with those slogans on them." So that was ultimately what we settled on.
And that's an interesting point, actually, that there was a couple of things that maybe weren't as appropriate, or when that's part of the journey, isn't it? To understand exactly
Absolutely.
When you're trying to decide that product or service, what is the right thing to go with.
Totally, and that was truthfully the hardest part of the whole thing for us. I think in the early days we had loads of ideas. And it was kind of trying to determine which of these is actually a viable business, which of these is something that could, generate income, and then, which of them from that list is actually feasible, which is something that we could really do, that we would realistically equally be allowed to do, and it's not, you kind of find the balance between, giving enough of yourself to the program versus just doing things that are hugely labour intensive and just wouldn't be doable long term.
Absolutely. So once you actually decided on this product with your team, how did you find working with your peers?
That was maybe the biggest learning of all, because you kind of do little group projects and stuff when you're at school, but other than that, there hadn't really been a huge amount of collaborative work that I'd ever really taken part in. And so I think one of the big challenges I found was exactly that, was making sure that, in the early days, we didn't have a shared vision, we didn't have a shared mission. We were all kind of pulling in different directions. It created a lot of tension. There were some quite big personalities in the group, myself included, really, but there were some quite big personalities in the group, and the danger was that at times they overpowered other people, and so potentially people who had great ideas or contributions to make didn't get the opportunity to make them because people like me were kind of taking up all the airspace. So there was an awful lot to learn about that, for sure.
And is that something, like, in terms of your personality, that has continued, or has your personality developed over time based on those experiences? Or?
Well, it's interesting. My personality hasn't necessarily changed, but the way in which I bring myself to collaborative occasions and events has definitely changed as a result of that. That was one of a number of learnings that I had early on in my kind of pre-career and in my career, where you realise that actually there are certain parts of your personality that, when applied at the right time in the right way, can be a real gift, but actually if they're applied at the wrong time or in the wrong way, they can be a detriment to you and to the team. And so I think that's something I really had to learn about.
And interesting, you mentioned collaboration. That's one of our key values at Young Enterprise, and what we try and instill in all of the young people that kind of take part in our programs, because collaboration is key, isn't it, to be able to success?
Absolutely. And that's something I've really taken to heart, in the years that came. When I went to university, I was involved in a lot of group stuff. When I went on beyond university, I led teams in business, I led branches in the kind of financial services network. I coach American football outside of work and coach football now as well. And so building teams and collaborating and working together and having that shared understanding and almost those kind of, it sounds grandiose when you're talking about a young enterprise program, but the culture that you create within that organization was something I learned an awful lot from. What are the things that contribute to and detract from that? What is the type of culture that you want to create, and how do you go about doing it? And in the early days, and in the young enterprise times when I was, kind of 17, 18 years old, it was you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. You didn't really know about this stuff, and you wouldn't have been able to put a name on it. But looking back, you can see actually these are things that we did that really cemented the culture, or things that we did were a bit detrimental to it.
And what do you think are the key things then, if thinking about culture of your young enterprise company, but businesses you've been involved in? What are some of the key learnings that you take away that I actually think people should consider when they're thinking about creating that organizational culture?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is to recognize that culture is just a series of, kind of norms and rules and behaviors and activities that take place within a team. It gets kind of, it gets puffed up a little bit, but at its core, it's kind of how people behave and how they interact with one another. And I think it's about recognizing the importance of managing those behaviors. If you lead a team or if you lead people, it's very easy to have, Fraser's supposed to sell 10 widgets a week. He sold 8 widgets this week. He's not had a good week. Or, he sold 15 this week. He's had a great week, that kind of thing. But managing behaviors, understanding what are the shared values and behaviors of that group, and then managing people to those standards is a hugely powerful thing, because too often, and in our young enterprise team in the early days in particular, there were kind of behaviors that were detrimental to our growth, that were almost walked past. Nobody really wanted to raise them, nobody wanted to confront them. So I think having those shared kind of agreement on the behaviors that are and aren't acceptable, managing people to those behaviors and being really open and honest about it, I think is really important. And that was definitely a learning. There was times when people just, there was conflict, but instead of dealing with it and raising it and having those conversations, I guess you're maybe not that emotionally mature, or certainly not as emotionally mature at that age as you subsequently become. So I think those were things that you look back on, you think, if I'd known the things I know now, we could have handled those situations quite differently.
And I think we'd call that nowadays, like that conflict resolution. And I know we spoke about this before, so how important getting that conflict resolution right is, not only for culture, but just how productivity and how people react and are acting together.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think had we been better at that, we probably would have got over the initial hurdles more quickly. When I mentioned that our biggest challenge, particularly at the start, was kind of coming up with the idea. We spent too much time arguing and going down paths that, if we'd really been objective about it, we probably would have discounted much earlier and moved on. And I think sometimes people just become a bit precious about their own ideas, and it's kind of like there's a bit of My Little Empire comes in, and if we could have had the skills that we have now, that might not have happened.
Sometimes personal egos sometimes come into play, don't they? And kind of take over. But that kind of leads on quite nicely to thinking about having a shared mission and impact, doesn't it? Because having a clear goal for the business that I know you're quite passionate about, as a technique to think about, or a really core driving piece of a business. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think where I've been successful in other areas of my life. So if I talk about, the under-19s American football team I led, we'd won 2 games in their history, or 1 game, sorry, in their entire 2-year history, and I took over. And in the next 4 years, we went to 3 national championship games and a semi-final. And really, that all came down to just being very clear about the vision for the team and the goals that we had set for ourselves, and just consistently reinforcing those. So there was no ambiguity. There wasn't an opportunity for people to be pulling in different directions. It was very clear, this is what we're here to do and this is how we're going to do it. And if you're not on board with that, then maybe this isn't the team for you, And I think having that clarity of vision and that clarity of purpose is really, really powerful. There's a great book called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster, which is about a kind of an Olympic rowing team. And it kind of comes back to that thing of, they had this opportunity to either continue doing what they've done and finish middle of the pack, or just kind of call it a day, or really take on a new challenge. And they came up with that, will it make the boat go faster, which was almost like their kind of North Star, to use a cheesy corporate term, and they were able to take everything, every decision they made was able to be measured against that. Will this activity that we're thinking of doing, do you want to go for a few pints after work, Fraser? Well, is that going to make the boat go faster? No, it's not. I'm going to be hungover tomorrow, I'll miss training, versus, do you want to go in and get an extra rowing session in tomorrow at 5 a.m? Well, that probably will make the boat go faster. And I think your vision and your mission as an organization can really help that, because everything you do is then tied into it.
And I think keeping it clear as well, isn't it? Making it fully focused so that's easy to understand, that's easy for everyone to kind of buy into.
Absolutely. And get everybody on the same page, and have those conversations up front. Make sure people are on the same page. There's no room for kind of lip service to it, or wink management, as it's sometimes called. Everybody has to be bought in. And if they're not, then either you have to consider changing it, or you have to consider changing the team. And I think that's something that, again, I've learned subsequently can be challenging, but can sometimes be necessary.
And I think especially when it's often friends that do Young Enterprise and do the company program because they think it'd be a great fun to do together, which it is. Sometimes having those honest, difficult conversations around mission and purpose, and especially people's activities or behaviours not aligning to that purpose, can be a difficult conversation to have.
Very much so. And you see it in business as well, where, perhaps we're a group of programmers, and subsequently, you get promoted and you become the team leader. Well, now you're leading a team that's made of your friends, and that's the same thing that happens in Young Enterprise. And so the skills that you learn in that regard, and equally the mistakes you make and the things that you learn as a result of that, become really powerful later on in those situations, because it is difficult when people are your friends, but maybe you're in a leadership position and you're responsible for the outcomes of the business, and you have to make tough decisions or hold people accountable, and there can be some kind of tension there.
And I think it's interesting you draw parallels with your work with like the NFL and football, because so much of the skills, not only in Young Enterprise, but really life skills, are so transferable. And I think we'll probably have some listeners listening in going, oh, well, actually, I've never run my own business before, or this is my very first time running a business. I don't really have the skills to be able to do that. But I know you feel quite passionate that's not true. So what are some of the kind of key skills that you've learned over the years that kind of tie back into your Young Enterprise experience?
So I think one of the most important things is communication. The openness and transparency of your communication, making sure everybody has the opportunity to speak, everybody's viewpoints are valued. That kind of psychological safety, I guess they call it nowadays. If you kind of know about Project Aristotle, which is a really interesting piece of work that Google did, about creating a psychologically safe environment for people to try things, for people to make mistakes, and there to be that kind of openness and support around it is really important. I think equally the most important leadership trait that, as far as I'm concerned, is humility. I think that comes across in everything you do, whether it be, in your social life, whether it be in your work life, whether it be in your schooling and things like Young Enterprise is about, even if you're in a position of authority over other people, don't behave as though you have all the answers, as though you know all the facts, all the information. It's important that you show other people that you're willing to listen and learn and grow in the same way as you expect them to do.
Absolutely, and that's really important, I think, that humility, because it's a good skill for all walks of life, and regardless of the situation, personal or professional. I think everybody could do with a little bit more humility.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
So I'm choosing for people that are listening while we're chatting, please do, if you've got any questions for Matt directly, please do stick them in the comments and we can pull them through. So yeah, please do get involved if you get anything you want to know a little bit more
Definitely,
about.
don't be shy. Don't be shy. Like I love a challenging question. I love getting into the guts of things. So it's a great opportunity to get stuck in.
So thinking about that, I'm going to ask you a difficult question, Matt, here, potentially controversial. People are quite often scared to talk about the failures that they've had in life. But I personally believe that one of the failures, it's not, people call it that, but it's really learnings, right? So can you tell us what's been the biggest thing that's failed with it in your kind of professional career, and really what have you learned from that experience?
Absolutely. So this is a really interesting one. And listen, I've had plenty. I could talk all day about this phrase.
Yeah.
But something I was speaking about the other day was in the early part of my career. So I joined the Royal Bank of Scotland in 2006 as an HR graduate. And one of the things that's always been a big part of my life is humor. Humor is kind of my currency. That's how I build rapport. That's how I meet people. That's how I kind of conduct my relationships with people. It's a really big part of it. And in the early days of my time within the bank, I kind of just went in with the same approach as I had everywhere else. And what I ended up doing unwittingly was almost creating a reputation for myself that wasn't altogether accurate and wasn't particularly flattering. So to give you an example, say you and I work in an office sitting opposite each other, and it's I've got a meeting at 7 o'clock in the morning, so I'm in before everybody else in this meeting, and then the meeting finishes at 10, 11 o'clock, and I come to my desk, and then as a graduate there was always this sort of this kind of stereotype of graduates as basically just still being students, kind of out all the time, partying all the time, not taking anything particularly seriously, and so you'd be like, oh, here's Matt, the graduate, crawling in at 11 o'clock again. And I would just play up to that. I'd be like, oh, how it was for his heavy sesh last night and all this kind of stuff. Just having fun with it, just trying to ingratiate myself in the team and, build rapport and stuff, but not appreciating the fact that what I was actually doing was creating this inaccurate and unflattering persona of myself among other people. And the challenge you have is once you build a reputation like that, it's very hard to overcome. And some people are quite keen, some people are almost kind of keen to accept that as fact rather than to be like, actually, let's look beyond that and see if that's what he's actually like. And, that was something I found hindered me in the early part of my career. So I think had I known more and thought more about things like personal branding and, my impact in those early days, I would have behaved very differently. And subsequently, when I moved departments and moved parts of the bank, I was able to, really refresh that. And even now that I'm running my own business, I get the opportunity with every new, client or potential client or collaborator I meet to really think about, right, what Matt Davies do I want them to see? What do I want my impact to be? What do I want their takeaways to be from this interaction, and behave accordingly. And I think in the early days I was quite naive, and I was kind of, my youthful exuberance got the better of me, and I didn't really consider it. So that's definitely something that I think all of the people who are on the program now, and at whatever stage of their career, have the opportunity to think about.
That's a really interesting point. I think looking at your persona and how people perceive you, because well known that first impressions are so important.
Indeed.
In all walks of life, personal and professional relationships, and I think often for our young enterprise companies that are just starting, making that first impression with customers, with the other teams, or with judges or whoever that might be they encounter. Thinking about how they want that to be perceived is really important.
Yeah.
And what tips would you give then for people who are thinking about their own persona, their personal brand?
I think the first thing is be thoughtful about it. Think about, don't. It's like a lot of things when I'm working with leaders. One of the things I talk about is intention. Be intentional with what you do. It's like how you spend your time, how you spend your money. Don't let them just be frittered away. Be intentional. If you choose to spend your money on rubbish, that's fine, but make sure it was an intentional choice. It didn't just kind of happen to you. And I think the same thing goes with your persona, with your personal brand. Is take time to think about, how do I want to be perceived professionally? How do I want to be perceived? How do I want to be as a dad? In my case, I've got a 6-year-old daughter, Harper, who is the light of my life, and I take time to think about what I want her experience of me as her father to be, and then you kind of work backwards from there, and you almost reverse engineer the behaviors from the outcome you're trying to achieve. So if in business, it's like, I worked with quite a lot of graduates over the years, because I did 2 graduate schemes, which is pretty unusual. And so for the next 10 years, I was brought in every year to speak to the new graduates who arrived and kind of share some of my war stories like these ones with me. And I would say to them, if you decide that you want to be proactive, if you want to be known as someone that's really proactive, really energetic, you need to be thinking all the time, what would someone who's proactive and energetic be doing in this situation? When this piece of work comes to me, what would a proactive person do? How would they handle it? How would they communicate with people? How would they feed back to people? All that kind of stuff, and just decide what that persona is and work back from there. And almost, it's like fake it till you make it to an extent. It's like you behave in that way until it becomes second nature to you,
Yeah, I think so. I think so many of us have ever seen that fake it till you make it. Have been such quite a crucial part of growing, especially a new business. You do have to make things happen that might not necessarily be there, especially working with new clients, or your first couple of clients where you don't have a huge bank of maybe knowledge or experience in that business that you're trying to create. And that's really where our young people are just now, creating a business from scratch in 7 months, to try and be as successful as they can be.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point. Is there any other experience of failure that you think has, or maybe traditional failure that people might see as that, but actually?
I think one of the things that was a failing in the early part of my career, again, was chasing other people's goals. So I remember distinctly back around the time of my my young enterprise days, there was a song by Baz Luhrmann, who's the director who did Moulin Rouge and those kind of films, and it was this, basically it was him reading out this letter that had been written. You remember this one? It's called Everybody's Free to Wear Sunscreen. It was a letter that had been written by a mother to her son who was going off to college. Well, that was kind of the story. I don't know if that's actually what it was, but that's how it was sold. Yeah. And there was lots of really interesting bits in it. It was kind of quite a powerful thing. But I remember distinctly being in Norma's, which was like the spa in Lawrencekirk, and this came on the radio. And there's a line in there, and he says, "The race is long, and in the end, it's only against yourself." And I lost sight of that in the early part of my career. So I was surrounded by a lot of people on graduate schemes in a bank, as you might expect, who behaved like they were on an episode of The Apprentice. They were kind of chasing growth and trying to move up the corporate ladder and climb the greasy pole and all this stuff. And you kind of get caught up in that. It's like, right, what I need to be doing to get my next opportunity, to move up from appointed to managerial to senior managerial and stuff. And it wasn't until quite a few years later where I realised that I wasn't particularly happy in what I was doing, that I took the time to stop and think, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? What brings me joy? What am I good at? What do I enjoy? And where do those two things intersect? And there's a really interesting book by Pat Williams called The Success Intersection, which is about exactly that, the point at which the things you're good at and the things you love meet. And now I'm in a place in my career where, about 8 years ago, I found that. It's 2013, I found exactly what that was. And I've been able to, flourish ever since, and to the point that now, as I say, have my own business doing it. But in the early stages, I think I was guilty of chasing other people's dreams. It's like other people, it's kind of like, you see a lot of this, especially with social media, which is a challenge that today's young people have that we didn't have, when I was growing up, where you look at other people's lives, you've got this mirror kind of, or this window to other people's lives, or to a very sanitized version of other people's lives. And the danger is that you start comparing yourself with them and chasing the things that they have, or the things that you think they have, in order to feel like you're going to be, like you're being successful. But actually, you realize as you get a little bit older that success is measured on your own terms. And just because you don't have maybe the material possessions or the career at the level of an organization that they have, it doesn't mean you're not successful.
And I think about deciding what's important to you, and your own measure of success.
Absolutely.
So what is it that inspires you then? What gets you out of bed in the morning, especially now that you run your own business? What's your motivation?
So my motivation in every facet of my life is exactly the same. It's helping people be better, helping people achieve things, helping people succeed on whatever measure they choose. With my parenting of Harper, I want her to be successful in whatever measure she chooses. I want her to be happy, to be fulfilled, to enjoy her life. I support my wife with the same ethos, in the same way she supports me. In my business, it's exactly the same. I want to work with businesses where there are leaders who really want to make a difference to the people that they lead and to the customers that they serve. And I have the opportunity to come in and take some of the expertise and experience that I've picked up over the years and some of the skills I have, and really help them achieve that. And again, with sports, the same. The vision that when I talked about the junior team before, our vision was to be the most successful, most admired junior American football team in the UK, helping our young people maximise their potential on the field and in their lives. So whenever I'm doing things with sport, for example, which I spend a lot of my time doing, it goes beyond the field. It's about how do you teach people things and support them to learn things that will really make a tangible difference to other aspects of their lives. And that's what gets me going. And when you have those conversations with people who it's happened for, or you can see it, you can sometimes see somebody doing something and your fingerprints are on it, and it doesn't need to be said. That's just enough to kind of fire you up and keep you moving in the right direction.
And where did you find that? When did you discover that actually this was your driving factor? Has it been something that for as long as you can remember it's been part of it, or was there something that really kicked that into
It's been around for a long time, but I probably didn't put my finger on it really until, I would have been about late 20s, early 30s, probably around 30 when I realised it, and I was coaching American football at Edinburgh Napier University for the Knights, and I was really enjoying it. And I'd actually said before, this was when I was kind of a player, I played for 8 years. When I was a player, I was speaking to a friend of mine who was a coach, and I was like, I just can't understand why you would want to get into coaching. It's like it's none of the bits I love about the sport and all the bits I don't love. Yeah. And I said, ultimately, I got offered the opportunity to coach the position that I had played, but for the Napier University team. And I just fell in love with it. And I realised, this is what's been missing, and that was where everything changed, because, a year or so after I'd been doing that, and I won City of Edinburgh Sports Coach of the Year, and then I got the opportunity to apply for a job within the bank, coaching people, which was a promotion as well. And I'd kind of coasted through my career these first 7 years and never really been promoted. It had just been sort of gradual, annual, incremental pay rises. And so applying for this promotion was quite a big deal. And I got offered it in the interview. I just lit up, because it was like, if I could have written my own job description, that's what I would have written. And so that was when I realised this is what I'm built to do. I was doing it professionally. I was doing it outside of work. And and I've never looked back.
I think that's a great message, and it's living your truth, isn't it? And it's once you find something that you love and believe in and are really driving forward, that will give you that satisfaction. And
absolutely,
experiences often have a funny way of just making themselves available to people, don't they?
Definitely. And there's an interesting parallel to this. So in the early part of my career, again, I had this idea of your success or your skills being like a graphic equalizer on an old school stereo, where you'd have the bass, and then you'd kind of have the middle, the treble and stuff, right? Yeah. So it's these ones are doing really well, these ones are a little bit low. And I had this idea of what we need to do is bring these low ones up. Okay, I need to just get better at these things and sort of average myself out. Well, I realized later on in my life, I'm not interested in being average. I'm interested in taking the skills that I have and the things I love and doubling down on those and really becoming exceptional at them and building a life full of the things I love. And so what I encourage people to do, and this is going to be really relevant to your people that are on the program at the moment, is as you go through this experience with Young Enterprise, take some time to develop what's called a reflective practice, which is something that would be really beneficial to a lot of people in their lives. So have a journal, right? I've always got a journal nearby, always kind of making notes of these things. But take time every week or every couple of weeks to think about what are the things that you're doing within this company that you really enjoy. I really enjoy coming up with ideas, or I really enjoy, kind of managing the finances, or I really enjoy leading people, and just keep a note of that. And kind of as you go through your life, seek out opportunities where there's more of the things you love and less of the things you don't. Don't worry about if you've got a total blind spot, like if you're, leading a business and you know nothing about finance or nothing about risk, you have to fill that blind spot to a certain extent, so that you don't get caught out. But, there are some people like me, I'm never going to be that great at risk. I'm never going to be that great at finance because I'm just not that passionate about them. So I make sure I know enough and I'm good enough at them. But, as I grow and the organization grows, potentially I'll bring in somebody that does those things for me because they're passionate about it and they're good at it. And I'll focus on the stuff that I really love where I can really make a difference. And I would encourage all of the people who are on the program to focus on exactly that. What are the things that they're doing within this program that they love, and how can they make that a big part of their life?
And that's something that, just as people, we're not very good at reflective practice, and really understanding how to do this. What tips would you give for people who are out there wanting to consider how they can be more reflective?
Right. First things first, buy a nice notebook and a nice pen. Right, they don't have to be expensive, but you don't want to be writing on crappy paper with a crappy pen, right? So have a nice pen and a nice notebook. That is step number one. The next thing is just get started, because it'll feel really clunky and really awkward for a start, and it feels a little bit kind of airy-fairy when you first do it. But once you get into it, you realize the value, So your reflective practice could involve something as simple as, writing down 3 things that you're you're grateful for. You know, a kind of a practice of gratitude, thinking about what are the things in your life that you're really thankful for. You know, that has been shown to be a really powerful driver of people's well-being. You know, taking time to demonstrate gratitude. It could be as simple as you know, looking back on your week and noting down things that you've achieved, that you're proud of. You know, that type of thing. And just take it from there. Take it wherever it takes you. Sometimes you just get a notebook and you open a page and you just start scribbling away on ideas. You know, it can be an idea that you've got for something and just let it go wherever it wants to go. And I think it's really important whenever you're doing something, whether it's, you know, young enterprise or you know, played sport or you know, you're in a band or whatever, you take time to look back over a gig you've played or a game you've played or a piece of work you've done and reflect on what went well and what didn't. And, you know, loads of people who are high achievers did that. Jensen Button, who, if you ever listen to the High Performance podcast with Jake Humphreys and Damien Hughes, he talks about it on his episode where when he finished a race, and you know, this is a Formula One world champion, every time he finished a race, he would go off in his little room and he would get his notepad out and he would kind of make notes of what went well, what didn't go so well, and then he would speak to his manager and his, you know, his kind of crew chief and deal with the press and all that kind of stuff. It was a really big part of what he did, and I think there's an awful lot people will get from doing it.
Absolutely. No, but I'm going to dive into some of the questions we've got here, Matt, as well. So the first one here is, if you could go back and relive your company program experience, would you do anything differently?
I think I would encourage more openness early on about people's thoughts and feelings, you know. So it was very clear at times when somebody had an idea and other people didn't think an awful lot of it, you know. And I think it's important to be a bit more respectful in that participation, but also, you know, for people to really be open, because sometimes what happens is, you know, somebody annoys you and then you just kind of, you know, you're almost like, I'll just cut them out and go and do this anyway on the side, and it just kind of pulls the team apart slowly. We had, you know, examples of that early on. So I think just encouraging that openness and that honesty in communications so that things are on the table. You know, you might not agree about things, but you know where people stand, and then you've got a chance to negotiate it.
And how do you deal with that when if you really, really disagree with something that a colleague has said? What would be your advice for our students who are, you know, trying to have that difficult conversation?
There's a principle called cabinet responsibility. So within cabinet responsibility, you know, we are a team of people, and we come in and we've all got our different ideas, and we put our ideas on the table and we hash it out. And once a decision is made, cabinet responsibility states that we all leave and we all support the decision that was made. Because what happens a lot when people are young and a little bit naive and they're a little bit immature is they'll be like, listen, I didn't agree with this anyway, all right? This wasn't how I wanted to do it, you know, but, you know, Fraser wanted to do it that way, so we're doing it that way, kind of thing. And all that does is creates bad feeling and makes the team look like they lack cohesion, which is not a good look from the outside. So I think it's about, you know, having these ground rules up front, that that's how things are going to be done. If there are areas of real dissent, we'll take it to the team and we will solve it in this way, whether it be, you know, by like a majority vote, or whether it be the leader who we've agreed is the leader will be the person that makes the final call on it. Whatever it is, we've got an agreed process. We follow that process, and then we leave the room and we all stand behind the decision that was made.
I think that's a great piece of advice, because process is so important in business and in all respects. But it's something that I tend to find that, having worked with a lot of teams over the years, is something that comes in quite late on in the process when they experience these things.
Exactly. And then what happens is, you know, we have this disagreement or this debate or this kind of ill feeling, and I say, right, here's how we should solve this, and everybody knows that my method for solving it is really just a method for making sure that my idea is the one that gets taken forward, you know. So you have to have the processes, and you have to have these conversations about how you'll resolve conflict before the conflict arises, because, you know, it's kind of like, it's like trying to have a debate with somebody or a discussion with somebody when you're angry. You know, you're not coming from the right place. You need to go away and relax and calm down and reflect, and then come back and have a rational debate. So having those processes in place early is really important.
Perfect. And we're going to another question here from Lara, who is asking, do you think entrepreneurialism is nature or nurture?
I think there's definitely an element of nature in it. So one of the things that I found really interesting and I did in the latter years of my career was RBS and NatWest have these entrepreneur accelerator hubs where they bring in kind of cohorts of entrepreneurs, and I just through some of the contacts I had, ended up going and doing quite a lot of work with them over the years in Edinburgh and Glasgow, working with them on, hosting events for them, whether it was a Celebrate Success event or doing, talking to them about setting a vision or scaling your company and some things you might want to think about. And so I was surrounded by all these entrepreneurs and I absolutely loved it. And I'll be honest with you, I was probably just too scared to go out and do it myself. Like I always had a passion for it, but I'm quite conservative financially and I wanted to make sure I had a solid base. But I think, these people, there are people who just love it, who just naturally. And one of my closest friends who I went to university with, and she set up a few businesses actually that have been really successful. The truth is, she was unemployable. Do you know what I mean? She was just not the sort of person that would have been successful working for somebody else. So there are also people like that where actually working for yourself and leading on things is kind of what you're built for. But I think there are entrepreneurial skills that can be nurture into people, and I think having an entrepreneurial mindset can be really powerful even in businesses where that's not the thing. We had the EDA, the Entrepreneur Development Academy, that we put loads of people in the bank on to think, to kind of learn those skills and think about whether it be design thinking or whether it be how to collaborate more effectively in things, because those skills can be really powerful, even if it's not in hardcore, sole trader, running your own business entrepreneurialism. So I think there's a bit of both, but there's definitely some people just have it in them. They just, whether it's something that, they've seen their parents do or they grew up wanting to do, there's definitely some people just have that spark about them.
And it's interesting you mentioned the entrepreneurial mindset actually, because RBS is one of our partners for the training for the company program, and over the next 2 weeks, for those that are listening in, we've got entrepreneurial mindset training sessions with the RBS Dream Bigger team happening. So please do jump in and get involved, because I think, as Matt just said, it's such a key element to understanding that question about entrepreneurialism and
it's like growing yourself as a leader. One of the things that I'm a big believer in is, as you go through your life, you're filling up your tool bag. You're filling up your tool bag with different perspectives, different tools, different ideas. And then, you're in a situation where you've got this whole suite of options as to how you tackle things or how you approach things. Whereas, one of my favorite phrases, to the man who's good with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. If you've only got one way of dealing with things, then ultimately you're only ever going to get, outcomes that are so good, whereas if you've got more variety, more flexibility, by learning new skills, learning new capabilities, you can really make a difference.
And that comes down to teamwork as well, doesn't it? And knowing what your skills are and what the skills of your team around you have to make sure you utilize them.
And that's a really important part of leadership as well, for anyone who's on the program who finds himself in a sort of leadership capacity. Is, it's not your job to solve all the problems. It's your job to create an environment and to clear the landscape to allow those problems to be solved. And that means letting the people bring the best themselves and their experiences, their capabilities, so that you get the most out of your team.
We've got another question here from Chrissy, so it's quite a long one, so he was read out to you. So do you think the dreams that students are chasing in their last years at school are a bit unrealistic for many of the students? They end up not actually knowing until it may be too late.
Last night I went for dinner with a friend of mine who I haven't seen for 5 years, who I went to school and university with, and she lives out in Dubai, is an extremely successful musician, singer, does modeling, does all this kind of stuff, right? She's been incredibly successful. And we were speaking about this exact thing last night, where she went to university at the University of Glasgow, same as me. We both did management. She did management and economics. I did management and computing. And she was like phenomenal. And I'm not saying like somebody that could play the piano. Like, she was a world-class musician, right? Even at a young age. And there was part of me at that point was like, why is she going to university to learn management and economics? Because it's not what she's going to do. Like, if she's got, if she follows her heart and her skills and her capabilities, it's not what she's going to do. And lo and behold, it isn't what she's done. She's done the things she's great at. But there was an expectation, from her, from within her family, from within the school, that because she was academically strong, that she would just go off to university and she would follow this kind of path. And I think there's an awful lot to be said. And it's difficult because when you're young, you don't really know what you want to do, where you want to go. And it's, you're kind of making decisions based on limited experience and information. But I think taking the time when you're young to find out what is out there in the world, to find out the types of jobs that you could be suitable for, and the types of things you could do, is a really powerful thing. Because, yeah, to Chrissy's point, I think some people do chase a dream. Like, I wanted to go to University of Glasgow and to do management studies and computer science and to become a systems analyst, right? I don't know where that idea came from. I didn't know then, and I don't really know now what a systems analyst actually does. And when I got there, computing was something that I was all right at in the context of computing students in Mearns Academy. When I got to the University of Glasgow, like I was just not even at the races compared to some of my peers. You know, a lot of them went off to work for the huge tech firms that we all know nowadays. But, you know, it was like actually what I should have been doing was focus on the stuff I really loved, you know, and followed that in the same way as my friend Claire did latterly. So I think there's definitely a danger of that. But I would just encourage people to have their eyes open and go out and discover the types of opportunities that are there. Even go to university in general versus learn a trade, for example. Some of my most successful friends, you know, financially, for example, are people who did that. They never went to university. They went and became a plumber or a joiner or a sparky, whatever, and they've built great careers from it, and they have a lifestyle that they really enjoy. So, you know, it's about don't take the path because other people want you to. Again, it's, you know, the race is long and it's only against yourself.
And it goes back to what you were saying earlier about finding your passion, you know, and understanding what really motivates you. Because university can be a long road for people, you know, who
it absolutely
4 years.
Can. And I think, truthfully, we were speaking about this last night as well. There are a lot of people who use it as like a kind of like if people are like, oh, what are you doing? You say you're at university. It's kind of like almost gives you a free pass. You know, it's like, oh, I'm just at university, and oh, that's great.
Yeah.
You know, kind of like it's like you're doing something worthwhile, even if you're not really that committed, you're not working that hard, you're not doing something you're passionate about. It almost gives you this 3 or 4 year kind of hall pass to just, you know, kind of coast a bit. Whereas actually those 3 or 4 years could have been spent, you know, doing the things that you really care about and making a difference in the world.
Absolutely, and people hopefully after the end of Young Enterprise program will see that entrepreneurship and or entrepreneurship within a small medium enterprise is a viable career option post school.
Absolutely.
You know? And we've seen many of our alumni have taken on the business that they've run as part of Young Enterprise and gone on to develop that into their own businesses that have been very successful. So,
and that's a really lovely thing as well when they find something through the process of. They're almost jolted into doing it through Young Enterprise, and they discover actually this is something I really am passionate about, you know, and also I see scope for it way beyond this program, and you know, you just never know what's going to lead.
Yeah. So your work now, obviously now running your own business. I think only few days old since you finished it at the bank, I believe. What is in your area of expertise now in leadership coaching? What would be some of the top tips you would give in your particular area of expertise to our teams thinking about leadership?
So one of the things that I really focused on in the last 3 months, I decided I was taking voluntary redundancy in May, and at that point, naturally, the work that you're doing kind of tails off. You know, you're handing things over, and you're sort of preparing for life after the bank. And in the last 3 months, I really focused on my network. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I would encourage people to do is even when you're young, you know, start thinking about your network. You know, who would you like to be connected to? How can you reach out to them in an authentic and kind of, you know, useful way? Equally, you know, who are people who do things that you're really interested in, you know, show the passion, ask questions, all that kind of stuff. So you've got loads of social networking tools nowadays that we just didn't have when I was growing up that really help with that if you use them in the right way. And I think that's probably the first thing I would say is think about who is in your network at the moment that could be useful to you. How could they be useful to you? And then who else isn't in your network that it would be valuable to add? And, you know, reach out to people to get handovers. That's been really powerful for me is rather than me just coming and saying, you know, Fraser, I'm really keen to learn about, you know, what you guys do. It's like, oh, my mate Dave knows Fraser really well. And Dave's like, Fraser, I've got this guy, Matt Davies. He's a top lad. You know, kind of use that leverage, get people to put you in front of people so that the door is open when you arrive rather than you having to knock on it. So that's a really powerful skill that I think a lot of people could benefit from.
And I think people are always so happy to help.
Absolutely. Because you're flattering them. That's the thing I think people don't appreciate is if I go to you and say, you know, Fraser, I'd really love to learn more about your business. You know, it seems really interesting. You know, it's kind of like puffing you up and saying, you know, Fraser, you've got something that's worth kind of me learning from, you know. And I think that's it. So if you just go in and say, you know, Fraser, can you give me a job? You know, it's a very different conversation to go, you know, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the habits is seek first to understand before being understood. You know, so it's amazing over the last few months where I've gone into people and said, look, I know you went out on your own and you set up this business and I'm looking to get in the same line of business for myself. I'm really keen to just know, you know, how did you do it? what did you learn? What were some of the pitfalls that you found and all that kind of stuff? You do that, and in the conversation of building a rapport, they say, do you know what, Matt, actually, I've got this opportunity that I think might be perfect for you, because you're building rapport, you're showing interest, and it's amazing where that can lead. So don't go in with an agenda, go in with an agenda of learning, you know.
I think particularly at the stage that a lot of our young people are, or some of our younger alumni, people are extremely keen to help anyway, but especially to help young people at the start of their careers.
Absolutely. It's kind of like being on a graduate scheme in a big organization. You have this window on the graduate scheme where you can kind of ask the stupid questions. You can just go in and sort of like ask things that other people might not be able to get away with later in their career, or, you know, get opportunities, or ask to shadow people, or whatever it might be, that if you've been in the bank for 20 years is kind of, you know, frowned upon to an extent. So I think if you're able to leverage that when you're young and just develop those skills, you can really open yourself a lot of doors.
No, absolutely, and I think those are some key lessons to take away from that. And because as we're coming kind of get to the end of our interview, something I'm quite passionate about, and I know you are too, is continual learning. You know, and always being open to new ideas. So I wonder if you could share maybe some of your favourite things to watch or read or listen to for our young people and some of our alumni as well, to share your own wisdom for things that you get inspiration from.
Absolutely. So that's another area where technology has really opened the doors for a lot of people. You know, when I want to do something practical, like a DIY type thing, and I've not done it before, I just go on YouTube, and there's 50 videos of people doing that exact thing, and then suddenly, you know, I know how to do it. So I think using things like, you know, YouTube is a great way of learning bits and pieces. But equally, you know, podcasts are huge for me. I go out for a walk 10, 11K every morning, and that is time I spend listening to podcasts, learning new things. So some of the podcasts I listen to that are great is School of Greatness with Lewis Howes, the High Performance podcast that I mentioned with Jake Humphreys and Damien Hughes. I listen to Tim Ferriss's podcast, can be really good. Coaching for Leaders with Dave Stachowiak. Try spelling that. I've no idea how he actually spells his name, but just look up Coaching for Leaders. Those are just some of the ones that immediately spring to mind that I've listened to a lot over the years. How I Built This. Now, this is a great one for your young enterprise people. Okay, so there's a podcast that's on NPR, which is National Public Radio in the US, that's hosted by a guy called Guy Raz, and it's called How I Built This. And he literally does interviews like this, but with people who have founded Ben and Jerry's, Patagonia, you know, Kate Spade, who unfortunately took her own life actually a few years after that episode was aired. But, you know, a really powerful interview about how she set her business up. You know, like phenomenal household names, the guys that set up Airbnb, you know, Instagram, all these companies, and it's really, really great. So those are great. I think reading is something I do all the time. My wife bought me a Kindle about 10 years ago, and it was it transformed me because it comes everywhere with me, you know, and I'm always reading. I've always got something to do. But I think there's lots of different ways to learn. My wife is halfway through her second master's, you know, so she's continued her formal education. Another thing I'm a big believer in is if you work for a company, anytime they're willing to invest in you to do any sort of course, take it. You know, take whatever investment people will put your way, and equally look at what are your passions and your areas of expertise, and equally if there's an area, a job that you know you really want to get into, you're really passionate about, speak to the people who do it and find out what did they do that kind of helped unlock that for them. You know, so yeah, there's loads and loads of avenues, but I think just do stuff you love, find stuff you're interested in, and just kind of follow that passion again, and you'll be amazed where it takes you.
So find your niche and kind of follow that path. That's great advice. So before we finish up, is there anything else you want to add or say to our young alumni and our current participants?
The only thing I'd say, and this is something I say to the young people I coach and the young people that I coach in football as well as American football, and to people I work with professionally, is when you've got a vision or a goal of some kind, one question that you need to ask yourself with reasonable regularity is, do my habits match my expectations? So if my expectation is to lose weight, but my habit is I don't do any exercise and I eat pies for every meal, then your habits don't match your expectations. So you've got two choices then. You either change your habits or you change your expectations. But you need to be honest with yourself. And that can be part of your reflective practices, looking at yourself and your habits and how you're spending your time and who you're spending your time with, and you know what you're kind of taking into yourself in terms of not just, you know, nutrition, but like what are you reading, what are you watching, you know, what are you filling your mind with good stuff. You know, do my habits match my expectations? And I think if you do that and you can get your habits and your expectations aligned, then those expectations will become your reality.
What a great piece of advice to finish on today, Matt. Thank you so much for your time. It was really fascinating and to hear your very motivated and really inspirational story about your time on Young Enterprise and everything that you've gone on to do in the past 20 plus years since. And I think some really great nuggets of advice for our company program students who are literally just a couple of weeks into their journey, but also some of our alumni who are just kind of starting on their professional career path. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for all of you who tuned in to listen and ask your questions. This is the very first one of our brand new series, chat to some of our alumni. You can catch up with our next one on Thursday, the 21st of October, with Bailey Adeoti from Decamai. So we'd be delighted for you to join in and hear all about Bailey's story as well. But thank you so much for attending today. And once again, Matt, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.